Theology Unplugged.
Hey friends, welcome back to Theology Unplugged. This is our Through Theology in a Year, and we're on number 41 talking about certainty still. I'm Michael Patton. I'm the guy who leads you through this. So I thank you guys for showing up. I really, really do. Please, if you get a chance, take a look over here. This is where I get supported from. That's the reason I can do the what I can do. Just point your camera at it and then click on that. You can see all kinds of things. It's a community, a theological community, and it's a way that you can support me on a monthly basis and get all kinds of free goodies. So check that out. But we are talking about certainty today. We're continuing our trek through understanding the anatomy of belief. This is so important for us. I mean, we're talking about I talk to people all the time who doubt. Some of you may know that. That's part of my job, is to deal with Christians who are doubting their faith and in trouble, in turmoil, feel like they're out at sea, lost. And I try to stabilize them. But if I could teach people one thing, I would teach them this at the very beginning, right whenever they come of age, and while you have your children, that you bring them up with this idea and understanding that there is a hierarchy of beliefs and there's a hierarchy of certainty. There's things that we're going to be more certain about than others, and we need to instill this within our kids. Otherwise, we're going to create what we talked about last time, and it was this house of cards mentality, where all of your beliefs are equally important and equally center. They all control your faith. And you take one away, no matter how uncertain it is within the Christian faith, you begin to doubt it and everything falls apart. And I see this all the time whenever people, they'll have their house of cards like this, and they'll go into college, and there'll be somebody who's teaching evolution, and they begin to think, whoa, if evolution's true, everything falls apart, which is simply not true. Now, I'm not talking about whether evolution is true or not right now. I'm just saying that it does not determine your faith. Sometimes there was a famous Christian leader named Bart Ehrman. You may have heard of him, and he tells his story about whenever he went into college, and he thought that he found an error in the Bible that could not be solved. His entire faith fell apart. It was a house of cards. He did not build a hierarchy of belief or a hierarchy of certainty. And this is so important, and we're continuing to do what we started last time. Last time we talked about the different types of certainty. Today we're going to be more illustrative and try to go through the different ways in which this applies. Now, let's move from the house of cards to a more boat at sea. So this boat here is at sea, and it is in trouble, as you can see. There are no anchors dropped. The Bible often uses this metaphor for us when we're talking about the stability that we have in our doctrine, the stability that we have in our belief system. It says in Ephesians chapter 4 that God has given us apostles and teachers and prophets, all of these people to teach us, pastors, to lead us in order that we might be more certain. What's the end goal? It says in verse 14 of chapter 4 of Ephesians, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by every cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. You see, this is it. It's not just teaching. It's not just teaching and saying what is the right way, what is the right doctrine. It is trying to give people an understanding of how to believe, not just what to believe. Now, you can move from this boat that is in trouble, and this is the way that I see most people coming up in a Christian home. It's not necessarily the boat is way out of trouble. It's just this. This is the analogy, the boat analogy for the house of cards. It's the same thing, just in a little bit different way. You have a boat, one boat, and look at that. It's got one large anchor. That is it. And that anchor contains your entire system. Everything that you believe is contained in that anchor. And if one thing comes up, it all comes up. If one thing, like the house of cards, comes down, it all comes down. And oftentimes, like I said, this is the way we teach people. We do not teach our children how to think through things in a way that has a hierarchy. And you may be sitting here and this is the way you think. And here's the deal. Even your way of thinking to where it's one anchor is contained within that anchor. And what I mean by that is this is going to disturb you. This may be what I'm talking about right now, saying that some beliefs are more important than others, and some beliefs can be wrong while the Christian faith still stay true, which is incredibly true. I mean, as we move through this whole program, you'll see how much that is true. But here's what's happening: is that this is the card that I'm pulling out. And I'm sorry for pulling out this card, but it is necessary. I find it necessary. And I am happy to do so. Not happy because of the feelings that you will have. I felt them before. The disturbance that you will have. I've felt that before. We have all felt that before. But because it will lead you to a more stable faith. It will lead you in the right direction. And everybody who has a house of cards mentality, everybody who has a one anchor mentality has to pull that up, has to drop all those cards in order for it to be rebuilt. This is called deconstruction. It gets a bad rap in the Christian faith because everybody in the world right now is trying to deconstruct us. Unchristians are trying to deconstruct us. Liberals are trying to deconstruct us. Liberal theology is trying to deconstruct us. And the difference is they don't want you to reconstruct because they don't want anything that they say, anything that they do to be wrong. They are more comfortable with no beliefs and everybody just getting along and fellowshipping together without any central beliefs that hold you together. Well, that is not Christianity, as we saw last time, as we've seen the last few times. There are central things that make up the essence of our belief. What I'm trying to teach you to do is to deconstruct and reconstruct, deconstruct and reconstruct. And one of the most important things you have to know about this, one of the most important mentalities that you have to commit right now to taking on, and think about it all the rest of this day. Think about it the rest of this week. This is so important for you. I want you to take time to think about this. You have to actually, in reality, not just conceptually, not just, oh yeah, I'll do that, that's fine. You have to truly, truly, with every belief that you hold, no matter how deep it is, no matter how central it is, you have to open yourself up to the possibility that you might be wrong. Because if you don't open up yourself to the possibility of that you might be wrong, all you're doing is wanting me to confirm your emotional certitude. And your emotional certitude about your faith does not determine the faith. Emotions do not determine your faith. Your faith is, emotions are great to have, and that's the one thing that you and I normally don't want messed with, because they're the front and center of who we are. It's how we feel every moment. As long as we feel okay, that's great. That's not true, though. We've got to open ourselves up to this feeling that's bad, like we might be wrong in every area. Morally and doctrinally, we always have to do this, and that is so hard. You've heard it before 1,000,000 times. The addict has to first admit his problem. In our understanding, here is our problem. We could be wrong, okay? You have to admit to that. You could be wrong. In every single belief you have, you could be wrong. I'll go in and explain that more later. See, we've got this big anchor right here. This is what we don't want to have, right? I've already said that. But we also do not want to have this, to where it's just tons of anchors and, they're all the same. That's also equally as bad in many ways. That's why last time we talked about, or the time before last, we went through and we talked about the hierarchy of beliefs. Here's the beliefs that are most important. Here's the beliefs that are least important. We looked at this chart right here whenever we were going through this last time. We said there are beliefs that are necessary for salvation, beliefs that are necessary for orthodoxy, and so on, all the way out to pure speculation. The thing I want you to see about this chart is this, that the more you get towards the center, this is all we're talking about today, the more you get towards the center, the more important the belief is. The further you get out to the sidelines, the less important that belief is. I know that this is what this says anyway, but some of the wording on this, which is very, very valuable, I'm not trying to apply specifically to our lesson today. I just want you to know more in the center, more important, less in the center, less important. Okay, get that down as we move forward. Okay, let's remove that. I didn't mean to put that up there. Now, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you to see your boat like this. I mean, this is the best I could do. It took me a while. Believe it or not, this took me a while to get this done. But notice here, you've got anchors of varying degrees of size. So you got the one up front, which is really big. You've also got the one kind of hanging off of the right-hand side as pretty big as well. Let's say, whenever we're talking about it from the standpoint of importance, let's say that the one that is hanging on the front is belief that God exists. Remember last time we talked about that being something that is right in the center. You cannot be an atheist Christian, okay? By definition, you can't. So the most furthest in the center is belief in God. But also on this good boat, you've got a big anchor right over here that's about the same size, maybe a little bit smaller. And let's say that is the person and work of Christ. Okay, remember, whenever I talked about this before, I said in the center of my chart, I have the person and work of Christ in the center, very center, salvation in this case, the person and work of Christ and the belief in the existence of God. Okay, those two are the most important things. Those are really the only things, besides your own sinfulness. You have to understand you're a sinner, because if Christ died and rose from the grave and you believe it and God exists and you believe it, it doesn't apply to you until you apply it to yourself and find the need within yourself. So that you're a sinner, Christ came, he was the Son of God who came and died for your sins and rose from the grave, and God exists. Those are the most center. Doesn't mean they're the other things aren't important. Like I said, lots of important things, but those are the most important. Okay, so we've got that down. Now what we need to look at is a different issue. It's very similar, but different. We're looking at this. We're looking at the chart of certainty, and we're asking the question, how certain are we? The last question was, how important is it? Now we're asking, how certain are we that it is true? And both of these together create this epistemic stability whenever you use it rightly. And what I mean by that is it creates a situation where the waves will not knock your boat over, according to Ephesians chapter 4. This is the stability we're trying to get to in Ephesians chapter 4, stability. So, but we have to have these two things. Can't have the house of cards. Can't have the big anchor. Can't have the many small anchors. You've got to have the variety. And you've got to know which ones to drop, and you got to know how large each one is. Okay? So whenever you have, and no illustration is going to work perfectly throughout all this, so don't keep on trying to push the illustration to walk on all fours. It won't. Just remember those two things, and you'll get it. But here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at and see from let's put it at, let's look at the zero here. Okay, what is the zero? The zero is whenever you are absolutely, completely uncommitted. You are agnostic. So you look at this and you say, I do not have an opinion. I do not have a belief yet with regard to this issue. I am not persuaded one way or another. Now, some of the things we may never be persuaded one way or another. It's not as if in the Christian faith you have to figure this out for every doctrine. You don't, okay? There are some doctrines we really have to, and some doctrines we don't. The more important the doctrine is, the more certain you want to be on this. The more stability, the larger the anchor becomes, the more stable the anchor becomes. So, and the more it has the ability to stabilize you. I don't know how to make that go towards the boat completely. I almost had it in my mind. But like I said, all illustrations don't work perfectly. Okay, so you have and here's another deal, okay? You got to listen to me on this. Just hang with me, because this is going to sound weird, or kind of weird. Some of you won't at all, but just listen, okay? The 10 is absolute, complete, perfect certitude. You could not have any more certitude. You know, we overstate things all the time. I could not be more certain. I am absolutely certain. There is not a doubt in my mind. That usually betrays insecurity. I'm sorry to say that. Overstatements always, they said usually, always, that's an overstatement always. Most of the time will betray uncertainty and insecurity because we're stating it because we're trying to put up a front of emotional certitude. And as long as we do that, as long as we present ourselves to others as certain and they're convicted of it, we become more stable in it. You see, that's what we do. We do this in every area with fights with our spouses, with our doctrines at church, and with anything at work. Well, we're absolutely certain that's not true. There are varying degrees of certitude. And number 10, you see, number 10 is something that is perfect certainty and is something we cannot have. You cannot have perfect certainty. Do you know that? Only God can have perfect certainty. He's the only one who doesn't have a doubt in his mind about things. Okay, you may say, well, I have perfect certainty about certain things. Okay, maybe you have perfect certainty, say, with analytical statements. An analytical statement is a triangle has three sides. Well, of course a triangle has three sides because by definition it can't not have three sides. It is a logical necessity. 1 + 1 = 2. Well, 1 + 1 has to equal 2, so I'll give you that. Maybe, just maybe, you and I can be a 10, and I think I probably can be persuaded of that we can have absolute perfect certainty about analytical statements. But not really much beyond that, except for maybe the reality that we exist. I remember whenever J.P. Moreland, the great Christian philosopher, was given a conference about certainty. It was a great conference back in 2004. He talked about how this was the issue of our day. And he was right. He really was. Back in 2004. But he said this was the issue of our day, and we got to understand we cannot be absolutely certain about it, just about anything. And he said, you know, the one thing I can probably be absolutely certain about is not so much that God exists, but I exist. That was quite surprising for the audience, right? J.P. Moreland, the Christian, you mean you doubt God? No, that's not what he's saying. He's not saying I doubt it. He's just by saying you lack perfect certainty is not saying you lack belief or strong belief or very convicted belief. It's just coming to a realization of who we are and our finitude before God. And so basically he's saying, he's doing the Cartesian method. He's saying, I think, therefore I am, so I must believe. But you can't really do the Cartesian method beyond that. Not really. Maybe that God exists. I might be able to give you grant you in an argument. Sometimes I can be persuaded that God must exist. So therefore it's like a triangle has three sides. Most of the time I can be persuaded of that. Okay, so with very few things we can be a 10 on. But God still doesn't, wouldn't you say, as certain as you can be that God exists, God still is more certain than you. You see what I'm saying? It's odd. So here's what I like to do. I like to say, first of all, only God can be an actual 10 on anything. Because whatever we're certain about, he's more certain. We have to admit that. Okay? So only God can be a 10. Since only God can be a 10, let's move God off this chart. And let's just say there's an imaginary 11. So God is the only one, and he's an 11 on everything. There's not one thing he does not know. That's why we rely on him. He can't lie. He can't have a lack of knowledge of something that can be known. He cannot not know it. By definition, God can't not know it. So he's an 11 on every single thing. And we're trying to square our mind up with the best we can is the mind of God. That is the pursuit of certainty, the pursuit of the mind of God. So the best we can be is 10 on this chart. God's an 11. He's a true perfect certainty, divine certainty, if you will. And we're trying to get as close as we can to human certainty, level 10. And there's not many things that we can do to get there. There are not many doctrines that we can have that get us there, okay? So what do? I want to start going through this chart. I want to start showing you how to fill this out progressively by taking certain doctrines, maybe a bunch of random doctrines, and placing them both on the chart of importance, the concentric circle of importance, and the chart of certainty, and show the relationship, okay? Let's start here. I want to start with this doctrine because it is a hot button issue today. And it is the doctrine in creation. There's a big doctrine of creation, and within it, it's a bunch of sub-doctrines. Because you can say, God created the world. That is one thing we all agree upon. That's in the center of the circle. That's what, by definition, God is. He has to be the creator. So therefore, God has to have created the world. But how did he create the world? We get to the details, and that's where things change. Okay, so you can say, some people say, did he create it in 6 days, literal days? Was it 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, or 15 billion years ago? Christians, all along the spectrum on that. And whenever you're studying it, every time you have to open yourself up before you study it and say, I could be wrong. I know that. I can believe more today than I did yesterday. That's my personal creed whenever I'm teaching, to help people believe more today than they did yesterday, and more tomorrow than they did today, because I know none of us have perfect belief, and we can grow in our beliefs, and I'm trying to make you grow in the most important ones, the ones that we're most certain about. But whenever it comes to issues of creation, you've got to admit we're not positive. You may say, I know how to interpret the Bible for sure. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you don't. Here's the problem, is that we often, whenever it comes to issues such as this, and we're going to come back to creation in just a minute, this is important though, we do not fellowship in very large circles whenever we are trying to establish a high degree of certainty, because we're insecure if we cannot say those things. I am absolutely certain. There's not a doubt in my mind. Well, if you're going to stay there emotionally, that's emotional certitude. It's not the kind we're trying to build. We love emotional certitude, but it's on the outside, and it should be produced from intellectual certitude. If we're trying to build emotional certitude, true emotional certitude, we have to admit we might be wrong on everything. And in order to do that, we have to get out of our circles. You see, here's how I began to realize that I could be wrong about things. I started fellowshipping with people that did not run in my small theological circles. You see, you may have your Sunday school class, and everybody in the Sunday school class believes the same thing, and therefore you're good, right? Or maybe you just start by yourself, and you don't care what anybody else says because they're all wrong, so you don't fellowship with them. But then once you start branching out, you start to see there are people who love the Lord, who are different than you, who believe differently than you on these things. So you get out of your Sunday school class, you see other people in the church, you get out of that local church, and then suddenly you have to consider that the church down the street might be right, even though you don't want to. But you go and you hang out with them, you sit down with them, you have lunch with them. Suddenly you find out, golly, they really do love the Lord, I can tell. How can they be wrong and love the Lord at the same time? Well, maybe they're wrong, or maybe I'm wrong. That's kind of the deal. You start building and branching out. And you go to sit down with you go to a Roman Catholic church if you're a Protestant. You go to a Protestant church if you're Roman Catholic. And you truly open up your mind and try to understand why it is they believe the way they do. And you look for the best of every argument that is against your position. You have to do that. Every time you go against your position, you have to look for the best of the arguments against your position. You see, usually what we do is this. We go find somebody who agrees with us to teach us somebody else's position. That usually doesn't go very well because they don't give you the best arguments because they're trying to confirm their own prejudice and they want to confirm yours so they feel better. So everybody's in their circle. Well, you want to go to the horse's mouth on everything and say, give me the best argument. Why is it you are a Catholic? And go to the best Catholic. Don't go to the kind of run-of-the-mill Catholics to where you can kind of say, you don't even know why you believe what you believe type thing. Just like if you're a Catholic, don't go to the run-of-the-mill Protestant. Go to the person who knows the most, who can answer these questions. That's going to make you the most uncomfortable. and then go to the Eastern Orthodox position. And just from there, what you do, here's what you've done now. You've gone to the different traditions that are here today, but now you got to start branching out and start reading church history. Read Origen from the 3rd century after Christ. Read Clement of Rome from the 1st century right after Christ. Read Ignatius from the 2nd century right after Christ. Read St. Augustine from the 4th century. Read St. Anselm from the 10th century. Read Aquinas from the 13th century. Read John Calvin from the 16th century. Read Charles Spurgeon from the 19th century. Read everybody. Spread out and try to read and see what everybody else believes. And I was doing this whenever I went to seminary in church history. I had to look at a guy named Origen. I told you about him. Origen was an interesting fella because he seemed to he believed in the resurrection of Christ. He was defending it. He was one of these that was threatened with death. And he was defending the resurrection of Christ. He was defending his own sinfulness, what Christ did for us. I was like, yes, go, Origen. Stay alive, hopefully. But if you have to hang on that cross, do it for Christ. But then I started reading around, and I'm like, wait a minute. You got a different view of the end times than I do. You seem to, you don't believe in the same hell I do. You don't believe in the same, you believe a really weird thing about the beginning, that we've all pre-existed, our souls are pre-existing. You see, I started seeing weird things in Origen, and if I was going to keep him as a Christian, he was dying for Christ, for goodness sake. How could I say this little small thing out here caused him to not be a Christian? That's what my temptation was. That's what I would have to do if I wanted to stay comfortable. But he made me so uncomfortable, I had to break free and say, well, maybe you don't have to believe all the same things. Maybe some things are more important than others. Then maybe sometimes I'm more certain about things than others. And I'm not really certain about whether or not anymore you have to believe this in order to be saved. You see, you got to branch out. And I'm telling you, you will not find one person, all the great people, all our heroes from all of history, you will never find one person that agrees with you perfectly. And so therefore, you're going to have to adjust. Reading broadly helps so much. If you just read and fellowship narrowly, you're going to have this fundamentalist, one anchor, one big anchor, house of cards mentality. And it's going to break. It will break one way or another. You better pray it does break, to tell you the truth. It'd be the worst thing for it not to break, because you would live your whole life possibly with all the right beliefs, but for all the wrong reasons. And I've seen people like that, you know. They have all the right beliefs because they all agree with mine, but it's for they don't even know why. They really have never opened themselves up to being wrong. You see, we're all going to be wrong about a lot of stuff. We really are. We got to realize that. We're all going to get to heaven, and we're going to be taken out to the theological woodshed, and we'll all be corrected. And maybe at that point, God will straighten us out. Maybe we won't go to a woodshed. Maybe it's not wrong to be wrong, right? It's not a sin to get a math problem wrong. And it's not really a sin to get a doctrine wrong either. Some are more important and evidence a lack of the spirit-filled life than others, but it's hard for me to say it's a sin to have bad theology. Bad theology is just a result of sin, kind of like death is a result of sin. It's not a sin to die. Death is a result of sin. And I say that, I think all the time. Maybe it's something that God has instilled within us in order to sharpen us. You know, our iron sharpens iron. Maybe forever we'll have these disagreements, and we'll fellowship broadly, and we'll have great arguments, and we'll change our positions. We have to open ourselves up, even in eternity, even on the new earth. We have to start with this every day. I might be wrong. Help me to learn something new today. Help me to change any opinion that I have that is wrong, Lord. Well, isn't that great? I mean, to think that way. It changes everything. It does. It changes everything. It helps you, again, do everything we're trying to do. Get the right anchor and get it the right weight. Okay? Drop the right anchor and drop the right weight. Those are the two things we're trying to do. So let's take back to our subject, the hot item today, and that is the historical Adam. And we're going to use that illustration for the rest of our time here today. Maybe I'll give you one or two more, but next time we'll go through tons of illustrations. But the historical Adam. Okay, so how important is it to have a historical Adam? Now, there are some people out there who believe that the story of Adam and Eve in Genesis is more typological. It's just an illustration. It's just kind of it's a mythology that basically teaches a truth. Like parables. Parables are not true, but they teach a truth. Maybe the creation account is kind of parabolic. And some people would say it's polemic. It's fighting against the other gods of the day. It's relevant to them, even though it's not true. And it doesn't have to be true the way we would think it has to be true, because they have different ways of writing, different ways of communicating. And you got to get it in their mind back then and understand what it was trying to teach, because the Bible is true in what it is trying to teach. Sometimes we don't know what it's trying to teach, and we misunderstand what it's trying to teach. So there are people today who do not believe we need a historical Adam in order for our faith to be true. They believe in Christ, the resurrection, their own sinfulness, everything. Okay? But whenever it comes to the historical Adam, they say, no, there probably wasn't a historical Adam. Just an archetype. Just an archetype to show how we all fell. And, I believe we fell. And I believe I'm a sinner. So the end result is the same. So there's a big debate. Do we have to have a historical Adam and Eve or not? And there's in evangelicalism even. There's good evangelicals who believe, and some people would disagree with me about that. Okay, that's fine. That's part of the debate. But there's good evangelicals over here who do not think we need one. And there's all along the spectrum, okay? People who believe literal Adam 6,000 years ago, you can count it back, and it happened just that way. Snake talked and everything. How important is it to have a historical Adam? William Lane Craig just wrote a book about this. He's a great Christian philosopher, and he just wrote a book. He's getting in all kinds of trouble for this because he proposes, number one, he does believe in there has to be a literal Adam and Eve, okay? So get that down. But he says probably that was 700,000 years ago. There was this pre-Adamic, and there's all kinds of reasons for it because all the genetics can go back to this particular person. But there's this pre-Neanderthal type of humanoid. It is a humanoid, and smart, God bestowed it with the Spirit, and this is the first human. And he said that's where the birth of humans was. And from then on, sin spread, and that was Adam. God kind of chose this one, said, okay, this is going to be the Adam, because man has developed to the point where I want him to develop to. Believes in evolution, so they're taking the early chapters of Genesis as representative, typological type thing, polemic, and so they don't believe in the literalness of it at all. And William Lane Craig says, yeah, I understand that other part, but I think there has to be a literal Adam because there has to be a federal headship. There has to be somebody we fell with in order for Christ, whenever he died. We had to be identified with the first Adam so that we could be identified with the second Adam. That's the basic argument. I think it's a good argument. Okay, so all of that to say this. Number one, I do believe in a literal historical Adam. I'm not going to talk right now about anything else beyond that. I mean, because it doesn't matter, but that's our subject. How important is it, though? Okay, I'm going to go to the PowerPoint here, and I'm going to say, first, let's look at where it belongs on this. And I would say whenever you're talking about the historical Adam, remember, all we're doing right now is saying more toward the center, the more important, the more towards the outside, the least important. Okay, I think it is pretty important for the historical Adam. I would put it not in the center circle, but I would put it right here. I think that's probably a good place to put it. That's about where it is in my belief. I say, listen, you need to have a historical Adam. You do, because of Christ and because what he represents. And so there's a There's a certain importance to it. Not salvation importance, but a deep importance to it. And I have all my reasons. I'll put together my arguments. I'm open to being wrong about that. I see it as important. Then I ask the question, okay, what's next? Well, the next question is, how sure are you of this? And I would say, okay, let's go. Let me give you some representation first before I place historical Adam and end this. I would say whenever it comes to the existence of God, I'm about as far over here as I can get. When it comes to the resurrection of Christ, since it's a historical issue, do not jump all over me for this, but I'm right here. I may be a little bit lower. I may be scared that you guys are going to kind of freak out if I go too much lower. I've got a lot of room to grow there, but you have to understand this chart of certainty, whenever I'm up at an 8, that is very, very strong belief. Okay, that is close to as strong as you can get. Like I said, I may have misplaced it, but it's there because it's so important. It is of central importance, and I do think the scriptures, the Bible, the history makes it. God has made a big enough footprint to where we can have it all the way that high, or at least close to that, to where we can be certain of it. It is a big anchor. And it's dropped, and our boat does not fly around because of how big that anchor is. It's an 8. An 8 anchor is huge. It really is. And combine that with the 9 anchor of the existence of God, combine that with the other ones you see how it does this? You see how it works? Okay, so now I'm an 8 whenever it comes to the resurrection of Christ. Whenever it comes to other things, let's talk about the inspiration of Scripture right here. Whoa, Michael, you're only a 3? Are you kidding me? You're only a 3 whenever it comes to the end? Yes, that's about where I'm at. It's not close to as important. It's not close to as important as the resurrection of Christ, and I'm not close to as certain about it. But let's watch this. Watch what I'm going to do here. Okay, just watch. Whenever it comes to the historicity of Scripture, that's whenever I go over here, a lot higher. You see, I believe it's historical, that it tells true history. I believe that it's, if you say, what about just basically accurate history? Not really accurate history, like right here, but basically accurate history. I would say, oh, basically accurate. It goes all the way back up to here where resurrection of Christ is, because it's accurate enough to get the resurrection down. You see what I'm doing here? Okay, I don't want to mix you up, so let's go to another doctrine. Let's go to, say, the pre-tribulationalist rapture. I do believe in the pre-tribulationalist rapture. I believe that Christ is going to come get the church in the future. He's going to come get the church. There'll be a 7-year tribulation, and then we'll come back down and reign with him for 1,000 years. Okay? That's called pre-tribulationalism. I believe that Christ is coming before the tribulation. Where am I at on that? Well, I would put myself somewhere between a 0 and a 1. And I do get in trouble for these things because everybody wants me to be, whenever I believe something, believe it absolutely. That is not true. That is not the way we do things. That's not the way we believe. We have varying degrees of certainty along with varying degrees of import. Whenever it comes to the importance of the pre-tribulationalist rapture, I would put it way out here on important, but not essential. It does affect my faith. It is important, but it is certainly not essential, and not as essential as many other things. Do you see how this works? Do you see the mindset that you're having of this 3-dimensional, this 4-dimensional mindset whenever we're talking about the stability of our faith? The anatomy of faith is made up of many different things, and we break it down and we open ourselves up to the ability we might be wrong. Now back to the historical Adam. Where would I put my certainty that Adam has to be historical? I would probably put it around a 5, which is high. Now, let me go back and say this one thing before I end, okay? I am not a 0 on these. That is where I just have not made up my mind. Okay? If I am toward a 1, I believe in it. I believe enough to say I can commit myself to that. So most of my beliefs are going to be around a 1 or a 2. The smaller ones especially. I won't spend much time on some things to where I'll stay in the 0. And I'll just say, I haven't dealt with that yet. I'm going to be honest with you. I have not dealt with that doctrine yet, so therefore I'm not going to make a statement on it, and I'm not committing myself one way or another. That is fine. That's better than falsely committing yourself to something. You've got to deal with each one. You're sitting here out at sea, and you've either got 1,000 acres down or one representative anchor down. You've got a house of cards. We've got to pull that down. You've got to pull every anchor up that you have down. You've got to reevaluate it. That's what we're doing. As we go through this program, we're going to be reevaluating every single anchor. And I'm going to be making arguments for positions that go against the anchor that you want to drop so much. You want to redrop it. And you're going to be convinced of some of them. You're going to scratch your head and you're going to say, I didn't know there was that good of an argument against my position. Now I'm very disturbed. That's okay. We have to go through disturbances whenever you're going through theology. That's part of theology. If you just want me to come here and confirm all your prejudices, you have come to the wrong place. Because I'm not even going to confirm all of my prejudices. I'm going to give you the arguments for all positions, both historic and contemporary, on the issues, the important issues. We're going to stick to the most important issues. I don't have time to deal with the smaller issues that are fun, yet they're just not important. I'll try to deal with the most important issues throughout church history and everything that you need to know, and I'm going to give you the arguments on every side. And in the end, I want one anchor to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and all the other anchors to get relative to the size of import. Okay? Remember how I've talked about this in such a way. I want you to hold on to one rope more tightly while loosening up on other ropes. And to do that, we're going to have to fellowship broadly. You're going to have to open your mind, and we're going to have to get into church history. Not just the Bible. The Bible is going to be our ultimate source. We haven't established that yet, but we're going to later. But the Bible is going to be our ultimate source. That's the argument I'm going to make. Are you ready for that? That's the question. Before you even move any further, are you ready? This is the deconstruction, reconstruction. Deconstruction, reconstruction. This is the process I'm asking you to get involved in, and I hope you join us. Once again, if you want to support this, what I'm doing, you like this idea, this is an irenic theology, but it's very powerful. It's irenic, peaceable. I'm not just trying to present one position. I'm irenic, peaceable. But at the same time, it's going to be strong. It's going to push. It's going to push you hard. It's not going to, sometimes it'll make you comfortable, other times it won't, but I promise you, in the end, it'll make you excited. If you like this kind of stuff, if you like what I'm doing here, please, 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 I need your support, because you're the reason I can do this. You're the reason every single day I can get up and make a contribution here. If you believe what I'm doing for you and your growth, please become a member. But if you also believe in this as a mission, this type of theology as a mission to the church that is unique, that not everybody's doing this way. Unfortunately, it is very unique. I can count on one hand any of the bigger ministries that are doing it this way. There's not many. Please help us to grow. Please help this to continue. Become a member. Thank you so much for joining today, and I will see you next time.
Theology